Thank you, Aisha. So now we are going to introduce a poll before we get started. So we'll let Aisha set that up.
Oh, here it is. Okay.
So our question today in the poll box is, where are you from? We would like to know where our participants are located. So if you will allow some time so that way we can get a general idea of where everybody's from. At the maybe 45-second mark, we'll go ahead and end the poll. We're seeing a lot of South Texas, Central Texas. Okay, we'll allow a couple more seconds just so everybody gets their answers in. I think we're missing 3 participants.
I'm one of them.
I'm probably
And
one of them too.
yeah, close. Okay.
Okay.
Good.
So these are our results. If you can see them, we have 57% from South Texas, 14% from East Texas, 5% from North Texas, 10% from West Texas, and 14% from Central Texas. Great. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. We'd like to thank you for joining us here today on our second session of the Woman in Ag series. And so we'll go ahead and dive in with our first presenter. The topic will be establishing and maintaining ag leases. And this is Jenny Poolhar, the Executive Director of Texas Grazing Land Coalition and Cattle Rancher. Jenny?
All right, I should be unmuted. And now I'm going to share my screen. See if I can do this right. All right, can you hear me, Megan?
I can sure hear you. You're ready to go.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit today about some things to know about leasing land, whether you're the lessee or the owner of the land. This comes from experience. I manage 3 ranches in the Panhandle, all of which have farms associated with them. I've done this for 25 years, and we've changed lessees out, and I've had good ones and bad ones, and finally I think I've got the ones I want. As Megan said, I'm executive director of the Texas Grazing Land Coalition, and Taylor Ranches are the properties in the Panhandle. Also have a family ranch in Montana that I'm the trustee for. So let's talk about this a little bit here. How come it's not going? My PowerPoint. Megan, why am I not?
Okay.
It's frozen there.
1 second.
I'm hitting escape and not getting back to the slide controls. Here we go.
There we go.
All right. So I'm assuming I'm talking mostly to a female audience since this is a women in ag thing. And there's one thing I want you to know. We have, it's different for women working in agriculture. Sometimes you feel like you don't get the respect the guys do. Sometimes you feel like people assume you don't know what you're doing. I want to tell you that we've got a few things guys don't have. Our attention to detail is different. We see things differently often than men do. And that's a positive. We also have that little thing called women's intuition, that old gut feel thing. Don't ever ignore that. That is valuable stuff right there. Don't ignore that. And I'll tell you one thing that you need to do. You need to be firm in dealing with people, always. Don't ever let them think you're wishy-washy or they can talk you out of something just because you're a woman. Just some little things about working with women. and us trying to work with men in agriculture. And if you don't know how to do something, I can't take a tractor apart. You know, that's just not in my skill set. My husband, he grew up doing that in Montana. I did not. Don't be afraid to say when you don't know something too. Don't be afraid to get help. If you get help, if you need help with something, figuring out something, people will be glad to help you if you're engaged and wanting to learn and stuff. But it's okay to not know everything the guys do. The single most important thing between a landowner and a lessee is trust. There's just no replacing trust. You've got to trust they're taking care of your land. They've got to trust that you're not going to leave them hanging high and dry. You need a lessee or a landowner that shares your values. A lot of landowners and a lot of lessees, their main value is just to make a bunch of money, whether it's grazing cattle. Most of my experience is with grazing cattle. I'm not as good with the whole farm lease thing, but their whole goal is to make a bunch of money, which might lead to overstocking. And if the goal on the landowner's part is to earn a bunch of money, they might allow anything like that to go on. So it's a good idea to look for someone who shares your values. And I'm going to guess that a lot of people that are on this presentation care for their land, care about land they lease or own, either way, and they want it cared for. And so you need someone who shares your values. And we're going to talk about how to find those people. You leave nothing open to interpretation. Spell it out. None of this handshake business, none of this, I'll pay you twice a year on these 2 dates, none of this verbal stuff, none of this handshake stuff. You can get into the biggest legal messes doing that. The first time the cattle get out on the highway and a car hits them and you don't have it spelled out who was maintaining the fence or liability insurance or little details like that, you don't want to get into your word against somebody else's word. Write everything down. I'm going to give you a resource at the end of my presentation. This woman's name is Tiffany Dowell Lashmet, and she has an ag law blog. She works for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, and she is a, I don't know if you guys can see the ads popping up. I got to make those go away. She is an attorney for A&M AgLife Extension, and she is excellent. I'm going to give up. Can you see that in the corner, Megan? The ad that's on my screen? Those things irritate me. Anyway, Tiffany Dowell Lashmet, she has an ag law blog. She does a whole workshop, a half-day workshop on what to have in your contract and how to do those things. So I'm going to talk more about human resource things and give you her information that you can deal with her. Anyway, that's one of the big messages we both have, is leave nothing open to interpretation. Spell it out. Who's going to pay for what? Who's going to buy what? Well, if you have a lessee for 10 years, maybe it's a 1-year lease and he has it for 10 years and he leaves and starts picking things up and taking them, have all that spelled out. And I will tell you that at Taylor Ranch, anything that's permanent on the property is ours. Whether it's a windmill, a water well, a solar panel, things like that. If a lessee puts up a fiberglass tank, he can take that with him. And if he goes out and pays for something, I had a lessee put a building up, a little metal building. We had the same lessee, the same family for 20 years. He put up a little metal building at the pens where we work cattle. And when we canceled his lease, he was cutting it down. And it says in the lease that anything permanent that's put up stays there. So I had to kind of get the sheriff to help me contend with that situation. He was taking down a building off of a concrete foundation. So spell it out, what goes where and who owns what, spell it out, who repairs what. Maybe we often provide, we try to keep the fences in good shape. We pay for that. And then I provide posts and barbed wire and whatever needs to go into it, and they maintain them. But spell all that out. And when your lessee leaves, he doesn't take your stuff with him. So make sure you've got all that spelled out. I would strongly consider requiring liability insurance. We talked briefly touched on what happens when the cattle get on the highway and a car hits them. That happens all the time. And if your lessee has got liability insurance that includes you on it, then you are protected in those situations. If he has his friends out to help work cattle or ride horses or anything, and somebody gets hurt, you are protected if there's liability insurance. And it's not an expensive thing to get. It's not near as expensive as you think, but it's a good tool to have. It's a good tool for you as a landowner to have, but it's a good tool to have your lessee, to require your lessee to have as well. You need to know what you have. You need to know how many acres you have. You need forage quantity and quality. We're going to talk a little more about that. And you need to know the condition of your improvements. You can get maps from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Quantity and quality of forage, like I said, we'll talk more about that. You can get someone to help you do that. And condition of improvements, nothing beats photographs. You should have complete photographs of the items on your property and how you expect them to be maintained. And if you're the lessee and you lease from somebody that doesn't seem to have this kind of stuff in place, you need to get it. You need to go to the NRCS and get the maps. You need to take pictures of the improvements so that if he tells you, hey, that tank wasn't cracked when I leased this place to you, you've got pictures. It's worth the time to do that. Let's talk about forage quantity and quality. This is in the Northwestern Panhandle. This is a place that I just changed lessees on. And I'll go through the process that I use to select a new lessee. That's my hubby in the picture. The lessee that I dismissed felt like we had a sea of grass out there, and the cowboys, they think I'm crazy. There's plenty of grass on that ranch. Well, the grass you're looking at is a grass called sand dropseed. Has zero palatability to livestock, zero value to anything. And the green stuff is mostly Western ragweed. Quail eat it a little bit, but it's really not worth too much. If you don't know what you've got, you have no idea. Here's a close-up. Grazing animals have distinct preferences. That's buffalo grass and blue grama in the bottom that's been grazed really hard. They won't touch the sand drop seed and the 3-on. They won't touch it. If they had nothing to eat but dirt, they might eat it. But if you don't know what you have, you've got to know what you've got. You need to know what you have for quantity and quality of forage. And those aren't difficult things to determine, but you can get help to do it. And the Natural Resources Conservation Service is the best place to get that help. You need to set a stocking rate. If you're talking about rangeland, you need to set a stocking rate. And you need to know how many animals they're going to have out there. You can't just ask someone to take care of your land, and you can't just assure a landowner that you will take care of his. You need to set the stocking rate right up front so that they know in writing what it is. I want you to look close at these two pictures. This is again in the Northwestern Texas Panhandle, but these grasses grow all the way to South Texas. That's Big Blue Stem on the left. These pictures are taken literally 30 feet apart. And you hear realtors and county people talk all the time. Realtors are especially bad at this. Hope there's no realtors on here that I'm offending. It's saying, well, the county stocking rate is 10 acres per cow, or that's what you can get if you buy this land. Those pictures are 30 feet apart. So depending on what side of the fence you're on, you can tell your stocking rate would be very, very different. Stocking rates are unique to every piece of property. There is no county stocking rate. There is no, can't go by what the neighbors stocked, or he's always had 20 acres to the cow. I think that's what I have. You have to look at your own resources. Okay, no county rate. And no such thing as a county stocking rate. cannot base stocking rate on what your neighbor does. You have to get a forage inventory, what you've got. You need to have a drought plan. The northwest part of, well, all of Texas experiences drought. It's a fact of life. We're going to have drought. We need to plan for it. If you act surprised when you have a dry year, you probably don't belong in this business. The Northwest Texas Panhandle right now is in an extreme drought. We've had a little relief across central and eastern Texas, but we're still in that extreme dark red color. The map that comes out once a week, I guess I could have put that link on here. Our drought plans are triggered, for example, by when you expect to get most of your rain. In the Panhandle, most of our growing and most our rain comes in the spring. If by May the 1st, we have not had 50% of our rain, then we plan to destock our places by 50%. And we are also prepared, and we reduce the rent to the tenant. We do not collect all the rent up front. We collect it twice a year. We divide it in 2 pieces and collect it twice a year. And that way, the November, I think it's May and November, we're trying to get it to be January and August. That way, the time the second payment comes around, if we are in a drought and and our tenants have had to reduce stocking rates, then their second payment is going to be less or maybe not even at all. So you need trigger dates, and that's based on your rainfall and your forage growth. If you haven't had the rainfall or the forage growth by May the 1st or June the 1st or July the 1st, or maybe you get a fall growth. I think in South Texas, you get some fall forage growth. If you're not getting the rainfall and getting the forage growth, you need to have a destocking plan. The ranch we are currently working through the drought plan on, we had the cows divided in A team and B team. The B team were the open ones, the ones that calved really late, that were just out of sync with the rest of them. We also had some carryover steers from the year before. The steers were the first trigger, and they were gone. And then the B team cows left. So you got to have a plan to do this, and it's a good idea to try to save some forage if you can. As a landowner, I'm going to say now, you need to plan to be involved. Don't lease your land and never pay attention to it again. Then you might be surprised at the end of the lease on what's left or how things have been treated or what's going on. Plan to be involved. Even if you're not the most savvy, that's not your business, you're not the most savvy ag person in the world, you're not, just plan to be involved. You'll learn and you'll see what's going on. I'm going to tell you something that my lessees and I do. We have a great relationship. These are pretty good sized ranches. We have people wanting to come hunt, people wanting to come ride their ATVs around. They want to shoot prairie dogs, all kinds of stuff. And we regularly do the good cop, bad cop routine. The lessee will tell him, well, I can't, to save his face, he'll say, I can't let you come out here and hunt. Jenny won't let me do that. People that ask me, I'll say, well, I've got this guy leased out there and he doesn't want that going on. So no matter what it is, we do that back and forth quite a bit. We have an understanding and we use each other to keep things like we want them. And speaking of other people having access, if you don't want your lessee's friends and neighbors and his daughter's high school graduation party and whatever else going on out there, spell that out in the lease. But the good cop, bad thing works, good cop, bad cop works really good for us, really well. We can keep things out of control and you kind of save face when you're talking to somebody. You don't have to say, I don't want you out there hunting. I just say, well, my lessee is not comfortable doing that. He's, calving in those pastures, or we're not going to do that. So I leave that up to him. And he says the same thing. He leaves it up to me. Visit unannounced. I tell my lessees when I'm coming, and I also go when they don't know when I'm coming. So it's very important to visit your property unannounced. And it's important as a lessee to expect the landowner to come unannounced. It's their property. They can come and go as they please. So it's important on both sides to do that. Here is the Tiffany Dowell Lashment, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Texas Agriculture Law blog. Her workshops and her blogs are outstanding. They are so excellent. You will like those a lot. She has a lot of the contract details and things. She also has, you get a little book when you go to her half-day class, and I think you can get your hands on that. It's a bunch of paper stuff bound together. I think you can get your hands on that without attending her class. But she's a very good resource to have. The link on there on progressive cattle is an article that I wrote on what a landowner looks for in a lessee. And you can find that. Progressive Cattle is a great magazine. It's free. Go on their website, sign up. They have stuff all the time. One thing I want to touch on that I forgot, here's my cat, that I didn't talk about is how do I choose a lessee? When I dismissed a lessee off the ranch in northwest, south of Dalhart, Texas, just 14 miles off the New Mexico line, I got over 100 calls. And most of those calls began with, hello, my name is Joe Blow, and I run some cattle. And I knew right then and there that guy was not going to lease my land. I need someone that can run a complicated resource. You've got a natural resource out there. Any guy can run a few head of cattle, and they're all over the place. Guys that run cattle are dime a dozen in Texas. They're everywhere. Every car dealer, every pharmacist in these small towns, everybody wants to be a cowboy. So everybody wants to be a farmer. Everybody wants to be involved in that. And we're lucky we live a lifestyle that other people want to be involved, but they need to realize there's a lot more to it. As I often say, if grazing and managing land was easy, it'd be rocket science. It's a lot harder than it looks. So how did I select who I got? Well, I looked at people that I saw when I go to workshops and put on workshops with Texas Grazing Land Coalition. I looked at people who came to those and participated in those and participated in things like these webinars. People who are out there trying to get better at their craft, better at what they're doing. So I had a few people in mind before I even started this, but to me, their ultimate resume is the property that they were on at the time. And I had 4 candidates, and I went and toured each of them land they were leasing at the time. To me, that's your resume. That's the open book. How are you taking care of where you're at and what you're doing? And I went to each of them. I know we have a couple of ag lenders on the call. I also called their lenders and made sure that they were financially secure and able, that they would give a reference. They'd give a positive reference for those people, that they were financially secure and able to stock the property. But to me, your ultimate resume is not how many clubs you belong to or what jobs you've had or anything like that. It's what the land looks like that you manage right now. So I don't have a lot more. My contact information is right there. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, I'd appreciate that. Texas Grazing Land Coalition, we have a pretty active Facebook page. I hope to be down in December to speak at Rio Grande Valley at the Hispanic Farmers and Ranchers Conference. And I'll even have a translator with me. So we talk together because I am not fluent in Spanish. That's a goal of mine. But I'd entertain any questions now, Megan. How are we going to do this?
Okay, so I think somebody had please share the blog. So Aisha already shared the blog.
Okay.
And the blog. We have one more question, and it's, can you send out the Dowell links in the follow-up email, or do you have those links? Maybe if you can check in the chat box.
I bet Aisha and I can get those links.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Is there
get email from her then that there's a new entry in her blog, and she's very active and all that kind of stuff. So
Okay, perfect. Is there any other questions for Jenny?
I can't
Wait.
see the chat now, Megan, when I'm on screen share.
Okay. I think right now you can stop sharing the screen. I don't see any more questions. Let me see. Where did my chat box go?
Yeah, we can get those links out. I can make a post on the Texas GLC Facebook page. I will put information about this seminar, and I will get I can put the links up for Tiffany too.
Okay, perfect. So if there's no more questions, if you happen to have a question for Jenny later on in the presentation, we'll go ahead and direct that question to her, and then she'll follow up with you as well. So thank you so much, Jenny, for being here, and a lot of great information that you shared today. We will go ahead and be moving on to our next presenter, but we also wanted to note that Jenny did speak a little bit about the importance of insurance. So next session, we will have an insurance agent, and that next session will be July 22nd. So in that next session, we will have somebody to cover insurance. So moving on, we will have our second presenter, which is Benito Garcia, ag lender at Rio Bank, to talk about some of the programs that the Rio Bank offers. Benito, are you there? Okay, give us 1 second, Benito. We can't hear you.
Good morning, everyone. How about now?
We can hear you.
All righty. First of all, I want to apologize for the virtual screen behind me. I promise you I am not in a scene from Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I was just trying to hide some of my boxes in the back. I am an ag lender with Rio Bank in Westaco, Texas. I wasn't expecting an audience from outside the valleys, but we'll talk a little bit about the bank and then a little bit about ag financing. Rio Bank is locally owned here in the Rio Grande Valley, starting operation in February of 1985, opened up a second branch in 1995 in northern McAllen. In 2002, we opened up 2 more branches. In 2009, the bank opened up another branch here in Westaco. And then things really started to roll back in 2018 when Rio Bank purchased Elsa State Bank. At that time, the bank was about 350 million. With the purchase of Elsa State Bank, the bank grew to $550 million, which is about where we stand, getting close to 600 million. We're real excited because this year we'll be opening our brand new headquarters in McAllen. It's a 6-story building right off the expressway, so we're really excited about that. For those of you that don't know Rio Bank, we try to put ourselves out there as your kind of bank and your kind of banker. We operate in 3 counties down here in the valley, which is Cameron, Hidalgo, and Starr County, with 14 branches from Roma to Brownsville. The bank has 185 employees, 9 directors. Our president is Mr. Ford Sasser III. Mr. Sasser is in ranching, so he's familiar with ag lending. To talk about how the bank can help ag lenders, you know, we pretty much provide the same type of products that other ag lenders do. Short-term operating lines for all types of ag production. Your intermediate loans for cattle and equipment purchases, and then obviously the long-term loans for your real estate purchases or any type of construction out in your ranch property. We also provide personal and business checking accounts. Our bank also has trust services and wealth management services. Let's talk a little bit about the short-term loans. Since we are talking about ag financing, our short-term loans are typically on an annual basis, just a 1-year renewal, and they're mostly provided to our customers for any type of crop needs, your row crops, your cattle cow-calf operations. And those loans are basically structured to meet the producer's cash flows. You know, when does the money come in? Are we timing it properly? We have had situations in the past where some loans have been made in the middle of the season instead of at the end of the season. We kind of try to fix those deals. Our intermediate term loans are anywhere from 3 to 7 years. And that's mainly for the purchase or refinance of equipment or livestock. On occasion, we'll do some real estate loans that are that short. The repayment schedules are always flexible. They can either be annual payments, semi-annual, quarterly payments, or even monthly payments. We do require a 25% down payment on all equipment or livestock, or something that's got equitable value to that percentage. And all of our loans are either on a fixed or variable rate, depending on the customer's wants and needs. Our long-term loans are for your real estate purchase or refinance. If you're trying to move from one finance group to another, we'll entertain those loans as well. Those loans are usually, like I said, between 5 and 20 years. Again, with the flexible repayment schedules, annual, semi-annual, quarterly, or monthly payments. On our ag loans, the farmland, typically we ask for 20% down payment or 20% equity. If you're asking for a fixed term, that's going to be on a 5-year balloon with a 20-year amortization. On our variable rates, we can tie those to a 20-year note. These are some of the programs that we have. As far as the bank credit standards, they're fairly reasonable. Typically, we're looking for a 600 credit score. If it's something that's secured, we're willing to entertain a score of 575. On a debt to income ratio, we're looking at 40%. On a debt coverage ratio, it's typically going to be 1.35 times. Your collateral, typically for operating loans, is going to be 20%. Short-term loans, 25%, like we talked about, and the long-term is 20%. What are we going to ask for when you're applying for a loan? Well, typically we're going to ask you for a loan application from the bank. We're going to ask you for 3 years tax returns. That's a complete return with all of their schedules, balance sheets, and your interim income statements. We prefer that those be prepared by an accountant and they're certified, but we will look at something that the customer has put together. In talking about tax returns and balance sheets, we do go back and check some of the line items, so it's really important that you maintain accurate records. Record keeping is something that is really important, especially nowadays. It helps customers with questions, obviously from the IRS, from, if you have a guaranteed loan, we have to verify that information for the FSA. And obviously, your banker will have questions at times that will require some type of verification. So your record keeping has to be very good. When you start thinking about wanting to borrow some money to improve your operation or grow it, some things to think about when you're going to apply for the loan is, what's the purpose of a loan? Depending on the loan request, your real estate loan should always be should always have an earnest money contract and the legal description for the property. There's been instances where the customer comes in, wants to borrow some money to buy some land. They're not aware that they need an earnest money contract. And sometimes when they do have an earnest money contract, they're not complete. We're missing a legal description, a physical description. All that is very important. When you're wanting to purchase livestock and equipment, um, you should always include a bill of sale or at least an invoice detailing the transaction. You have to know what you're really trying to accomplish with the purchase. We've had instances, Jenny earlier was talking about grazing cattle, where a buyer comes out, wants to come in and buy 20 head of cattle to put on 10 acres. Doesn't really work out too well. Um, so those are some of the things that you have to think about before you walk in, because these are questions that you're probably going to get asked. On your operating lines, uh, fairly simple. We want to know, is the crop going to be planted on owned land, on leased land? Where is the property located? Um, if it's for cattle, we want a list of the cattle being purchased or already owned, equipment, um, where it's being purchased, do you have a bill of sale, things like that. For your production lines, we want to know what kind of crops you're growing, who your potential buyers are. Do you have an understanding of what the current markets are doing? Um, One of the things that I ask all of my producers is to give me a projection at the beginning of the season, knowing full well that when I go out and do my first inspection, those projections probably changed at the time of planting based on the availability of water, what prices are doing, not only for the purchase of the commodity, but also for their expenses. Um, it, in the past, we've had situations where the prices are decent. Halfway through the season, the cost of the crop went up. Perfect example is when fuel prices went up a few years back. It caused fertilizer to go up. It caused chemicals to go up, and that changed the borrower's budget completely. Um, there's 4 points that I would like you to keep in mind when you come in to apply for a loan. And right now, most banks have their lobbies closed, so everything's being done over the computer, uh, via email, on the telephone. We do a lot of our work through the drive-through. On occasion, we'll have someone come into the lobby. Um, Unfortunately, this world that we're living in today with COVID has forced us to do things a little bit differently, but we're still able to work. Going back to those 4 points that I would like you to think about, is when a lender asks you for more information, it, it's not a reflection on your character. Living down here along the Mexico border, I'll ask a customer a question and they'll give me a funny look. It's not that we're assuming that the person is a bad character. It's just good business. When I put a plan together, um, the intent is to protect the bank, to protect the customer, but more importantly, to give the customer more working information. Sometimes they're not aware of certain things. You could be spending too much money on your crop, and the soil that you're growing on, doesn't matter how much money you put into it, you're not going to get any more out of it than if you put $100 versus $50 more to the acre. It's just not going to grow anymore. And that's some of the information that we like to provide our customers. Secondly, keep in mind that as things change, and in today's world, things are changing really fast. A change in a bank's leadership oftentimes leads to a different lending practice. Most of the time, they're a little bit tighter, a little bit tougher. We ask for more information. And that's not a reflection of you, it's just a reflection of the times and the management of the bank. When credit gets tight, as they have been here lately, the tougher credit standards are typically attributed to a change in legislation, the economy. Um, we have to be careful to make sure that we stay within the boundaries set for us by Congress. We have to protect the borrower's rights. At the same time, we have to mitigate the risk to the bank, uh, because that also gets reviewed by our regulators. To give you a perfect example, you'll see in the media a lot today about leases. You know, how much leeway do you give the tenant when they can't meet their obligations in the leases? Um, some folks are asking for longer uh, delays, so we have to think about those things. Properties can change really quick, as Jenny was talking about. Uh, so the property owner has to be able to maintain the property and keep up with their payments. At the same time, the bank can't allow them to go too far past due. So these things require us to kind of tighten up credit standards from time to time. Most importantly, though, is you have to be prepared with all the information that we talked about earlier. You know, we talked about record keeping somewhat. If you get complacent with your record keeping, it's going to be difficult for you to meet what the lender is requiring you to have. Sometimes we start our production lines, get halfway through the season, and the borrower, our producer has paid more attention to the dirt than to the record keeping, and that hurts them in the end. Both things are important. Obviously, you got to grow a good crop, but you also have to pay attention to how much you put into that crop, because you could have the best crop in the world and still not pay out. So those are just some things to think about. Um, in these difficult times right now, down here in the valley, we've had 2 years that weren't so great, and this year appears to be about the same. So there's some government options out there for either a direct loan or a guaranteed program. Here at Rio Bank, we do work with FSA and SBA on guaranteed programs. The FSA guarantees are typically at 90%, SBA guarantees are at 85%, USDA and BNI loans typically are between 75 and 80%. Got to backtrack just a little bit. Let me clear up something about record keeping. When you talk about, well, when I talk about record keeping, I'm talking about keeping your records as far as what your expenses are, what your production is, and more importantly, what you have to spend. I had a producer last year run out of money because he wasn't keeping up with his expenses. Fortunately for us, I was on our end. When he was just about out, I picked up the phone and called him and said, hey, we're about 2/3 through the season, and you only have $10,000 left. And that was a real surprise to him. When I asked him about his record keeping, and he goes, well, I wasn't keeping up. That gets to be a problem really quick. It's a concern for me from the standpoint, is he really paying attention to the business side of it, or is he just farming and watching the crop grow? Fortunately, we were able to get through the season. He paid out, did well, but this year he's paying a lot more attention. The situations with your record keeping, if you get audited by the IRS and you don't have anything in place or everything properly in place, that could be a problem for you as well, and that gets to be a problem for the bank. We don't like getting notices from the IRS or other taxing entities because the customer hasn't taken care of their business. At this time, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Benito. So there are some questions for you. The first one is, when you say record keeping, do you mean records on spending or on production?
Both.
Okay.
Complete record keeping is really, really important. A little bit of what I do is the farmer will turn in a projection for me for their operating line at the beginning of the season. As we're going through the season, I will make sure that the budgets that he has put in place, let's just talk about labor and fuel. If he says that he's going to spend $50,000 in fuel for the entire year, and we're halfway through the season and he's already spent 40,000, either he calculated something wrong or something else is going on in the operation. If labor costs have gotten away from him, is he doing more than what he should? Has he just not focused? Or if the labor expense is less than what he said it was going to be, is he not doing enough to produce a good crop? So when things like that pop up, I'll go out and do a farm inspection, make sure that everything looks good. The record keeping side, as far as the costs go, I had a situation last year, or actually a couple of years ago, where a producer sold some land, didn't realize that he was going to have some tax ramifications at the time, because the prior year before he sold the land, he actually had a bumper crop and he had carried over some income. So the income that he had carried over plus the real estate sale gave him a pretty hefty tax burden, and he wasn't focused on that part of it. That's why I say it's important to keep your records.
Okay, let's move on. You have a couple more questions. So another one, are the items criteria such as credit score, debt ratio, arbitrary for each lender, or are there specs comparable for the ag industry?
That's a good question. Typically, they are specific to each lender. Every lender has their own set of criteria. I mentioned ours. Ours are fairly liberal. 40% debt to income is pretty much the national average. In the area where we're at, we tend to be a little bit tighter. The world just works a little bit differently down here. Our debt coverage ratio at 1.35 is a little bit conservative. Typically, you'll see those somewhere around 1.25. Our debt to income, like I said, is at 40%. On a national average, it's probably closer to 45%. So we're a little bit more conservative. On the credit score side, we're at 600. Typically, you're going to see 680 or better. But we understand the area that we're in down here in South Texas. As far as being comparable to other ag lenders down here in the area, we're about the same as everybody else. A few others are a little bit, their credit quality is probably a little bit tougher than ours. The main reason for that is we like to use FSA to guarantee some of our loans in case our customers aren't quite as strong. Some other lenders down here don't like to work with FSA. They just they think it's too much paperwork.
Okay, so we have two more questions for you. And one is, what was the income loan ratio that you referenced?
The debt coverage ratio?
Income loan ratio. I don't know, maybe if they're referring to the FSA or the SBA, the collaborative, that one.
Maybe the debt to income.
Like I talked about, the bank's debt coverage ratio, which is pretty much debt to your debt to income, is 1.35 times. In other words, you need to be able to cover all of your debt at least 1.35 times. When you go out and get an SBA guarantee or an FSA guarantee, they only require a one times debt coverage. In other words, it's 1-to-1. If you have $100 in debt, you have to have $100 in income. Where with the bank, if you have $100 in debt, you have to have $135 in income.
Okay.
I hope that explains it.
One last question for you. Do you have a standard form that you require for your clients to give you at the beginning of the season for projections? If so, can you share a blank copy?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll go ahead.
If that person will send me their email address, I'll be glad to share it.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead and ask that person to go ahead and just send in the chat box, go ahead and put that your email address, and we'll have Benito follow up with you. So if there's any more questions for Benito, we'll go ahead. If you have questions right now, we'll save them to the end of the presentation so we can go ahead and keep moving. So now I will pass it on to our co-host, which is Ronnie Zamora.
Thank
And
you,
he'll
everyone.
go ahead. Thank you, Benito. He'll go ahead and introduce the next presenters.
Okay. Well, our next presenter, thank you very much, Benito, on that, is Eric Garza. He is a biologist with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and he's going to be talking to us about wildlife management techniques. What's right for you? And I'll go ahead and kick it off to Eric.
Hello.
There we go. We got your.
Thank you. I was waiting for y'all to start the video. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. And yes, so you're going to see my eyes going back and forth. I have multiple screens. That's what I'm doing. Sharing my screen to y'all. And there we go. All right. So what I'm going to talk to y'all about this morning is some wildlife management techniques that can take place on large and small acreages, both. So it really doesn't matter what size of property you have or what type of operation you're doing. Some of these can be incorporated if you so wish. All right, so the first thing that we need to do is if we're going to start managing for wildlife in any shape, fashion, or form is we need to know what wildlife species we want to manage for, because there are a bunch, okay? It could be white-tailed deer or wild turkey, javelina. It can be quail, any of our game species. It can be pollinators, okay, such as this monarch butterfly or native bees. It can be, we got a horned lizard here. It can be ecotourism and our songbirds. It can be non-game animals or even predators. Some people like to have predators on their property for various reasons, but we have a badger there in the bottom right corner. Okay, so we need to know this. And so that way, if we know what we're managing for, we can have some goals. And it's very easy. We put together a wildlife management plan, and it contains these things. You know, at the bare minimum, we need goals. Do you want to be able to see the animals? Do you want to manage for larger animals, smaller animals? What do you want from your property and the wildlife on it? Okay. Once we have an idea of what we want, we need to understand, what do we have? You know, we heard our first presenter talk about we need to know what we have. Well, that's a very, very good point. We always need to know what we have on our property and what it's worth. Okay. Not only in monetary means, but also what it's worth to us as just people being able to actually access the land and being able to enjoy it. Okay. So what do we need to do? Do we need to manipulate some of the habitat? Do we need to, in some cases, do absolutely nothing? Let everything be the way it is naturally. That way we can enjoy it. So the biggest thing is just create a plan. That way we have something written down that we can reference back to remember what we had and what our plan was at the beginning, because our plans are always changing and always evolving. And that's a good thing. They're supposed to. Okay, and of course on the bottom here, I don't know if y'all, oh yeah, I'm sure y'all can see it. Leave all riparian corridors intact. So a riparian corridor is simply the area around anything that holds water, whether it's a dry creek bed that only gets wet when it rains, or whether we have a river or any other sort of a body of water. Okay, so as far as the actual property, what do we need to manage? Well, there's four main categories of things that we can manage. Okay, food, we can manage water, we can manage shelter, and we can manage space. Okay, and actually these are the four components of habitat. It doesn't matter if it's a habitat for a human, for cattle, for any livestock species, for wildlife, for anything on earth. Everything has its own type of habitat. Some of them may or may not overlap with others, and some of them may be able to be shared with others, and some of them may not be able to, okay? But food, water, shelter, and space are the four biggest things that we need to manage. So, an example of some water improvements. There's four here. You can see on the top left, there's a male bobwhite quail there in some forbs, and it's right there next to a concrete water trough, and it's a homemade do-it-yourself water trough. You just dig out an area and line it with concrete so that it'll hold water. Okay, those can be plumbed with PVC, or they can be filled from any type of tank that you can fit in the bed of the truck or tow behind you. On the top right is an example of a commercially available wildlife guzzler, and guzzlers are just simply water catchment areas for rain and dew, and with a little water trough to reduce the amount of evaporation. Now that one is at grade or in ground. The bottom left, we have our traditional stock tanks that are dug in the earth and usually lined with clay or something else to make sure that they hold water. The bottom right, we have a concrete round pila or stock tank, whatever you want to call it, a water trough that is at grade. It is being installed at grade with a wildlife overflow behind it. So you can see that the water overflows out of the stock tank into the dirt, and it just holds water there. Wildlife prefer water at grade, so at ground level or just sitting on the bare dirt. That's where they prefer, because that's what's more natural. Okay, some other examples of water structures. So there you can see this is actually one of our state parks. You can see a little float there in the middle. That's actually holding up a piece of PVC pipe and keeping it from getting inundated with mud and muck. We have another commercially available style stock tank or water tank here with a float valve. So that little white PVC with the handle on top, you just pull it up and the float valve is in there if it needs repair. Now these have to be plumbed with some sort of PVC water connection. Again, PVC water, it's just got a little hose bib at the end that's left cracked open. And you can see there all the forbs and the wildflowers that are growing within the area around that tree. This is more of a sprinkler type situation or sprinkler type water structure that can be made. And you can see very obviously in that picture where that water hits. It's very green and there's forbs there, whereas there's very thin forbs outside of that, as well as thin amounts of grass. So when we're talking about manipulating the land, there are usually 5 tools that we talk about. These are Aldo Leopold's 5 tools that can either create or destroy habitat. We have the axe, the cow, the plow, the fire, and the gun. Okay, so we're going to go over those. So when we talk about fire, prescribed burning, what is it? Well, it's not controlled burns. A controlled burn is simply a fire that doesn't get out of wherever you put it. It can be in a barbecue pit, it could be in a fire ring, it can be your trash pit, whatever it is. A prescribed burn is actually a burn that is being conducted so that you attempt to obtain the goals that you had in mind ahead of time. They are generally inexpensive so long as everything stays inside where it's supposed to. They are a very natural way of managing property. Okay, there is, like I talked about earlier, there is a need, really need to obtain or define some goals. What do you want and why are we burning? Because it's not good to just go out there and burn a pasture just because, well, we're supposed to burn, so we're going to do it. Okay, generally speaking, so long as we get a little bit of rain, and for different parts of Texas, that means different times a year and different amounts of rain. But so long as we get some rain and we have enough grass or fuel on the ground, What's left over after the burn will quickly increase in palatability, which means the animals will be able to digest it and they will want to eat it faster. Okay, they will swarm to these areas. It will stimulate germination of some of our annual forbs. Forbs are just broadleaf herbaceous plants that are out in the brush, out in the pasture. They are considered weeds at some point in time, to some people, but really wildlife is what they thrive on. It can stimulate the nitrogen fixing bacteria in the soil that's usually around our legumes, anything with a seed pod, whether it's brush or a forb. So like I said earlier, we really do need an adequate amount of ground cover as far as grass, what we call the fine flashy fuels. That way we can actually have a fire that lights and actually carries across a pasture. For South Texas and a lot of Texas, actually, we're usually conducting what we call cool season burns to be able to promote growth. January, February, and March are usually the months in which we do prescribe burning. That way we catch the spring rains, if there are any, and we are able to recover quickly. So late summer burns are usually reserved for those cases in which we're really trying to suppress our woody growth, woody species. And those can be very difficult to do. There are techniques specific to summer burning, but those are things that you would kind of graduate to after doing some winter or cold season burns. Okay. Now, patchy burns work well for wildlife. So a lot of people think, well, the pasture was burned, the whole thing is gone, everything in there is gone. Well, actually, what we call a dirty burn, or a burn where there's just pieces of burned and a lot of areas remain unburned, are actually the best. So here are some pictures of some prescribed burns, and there is actually a dirty burn. So a patchy burn. You can see on the right-hand side of that pasture, towards the bottom, you can see where the brush was not burned. You can see where the grass was not burned. So that leaves escape areas for wildlife, especially wildlife that have smaller home ranges like quail, okay, or some of our rodents and some of our reptiles. This is kind of what you can expect after a burn, so long as we get some decent rains. That picture is actually 2 days after a wildfire on the Chaparral WMA. Here's another burn. You can see the grass coming up very quickly. This is some forbs coming up very quickly after a burn. That's about a year after a burn. That is full of buffalo grass. Another burn a couple days after. This was a day after the wildfire on the Chaparral WMA several years back. So now we're going to start looking at the plow. So root plowing. Root plowing is something that was created in the 50s. And if you're trying to remove brush and return the land as fast as possible to a grassland, this is your technique, okay? But like everything, there are pros and cons to it. So this is one of the most expensive methods. You're looking at several $100s per acre to treat. So it will decrease the diversity of your brush species. And for South Texas, that is really what wildlife thrive on, okay? If you don't have brush, you're not going to have a good diversity of wildlife. So it will reduce the diversity of your brush permanently. You're looking at a minimum of 30 to 50 years of recovery just to get a little bit of diversity back. What you will end up with if you do not treat afterwards with some sort of herbicide or another treatment is you'll end up with a bunch of weesach, a bunch of mesquite, and a bunch of prickly pear. So if your goals are deer management, or mainly deer management and not cattle management, this is not the technique for you, okay? But if you are trying to combine both livestock production and deer, this could be a potential technique for you given your acreage size, okay? So temporarily, it will increase the herbaceous vegetation, which are those forbs that we talked about. It's because of the soil disturbance. This root plow is a deep soil disturbance. What it does is, here's a picture of it. It goes anywhere from 16 to 20 inches possibly more depending on the root plow, deep into the ground, and it actually cuts the brush off below grade. After that, it's usually raked and stacked and then burned. That way the litter is picked up. Okay. So disking is something that can be done by yourself. You can, if you have a disc and a tractor, you can do this. So it is a shallow soil disturbance, whereas the root plow is a deep soil disturbance. This is a shallow soil disturbance. Usually you're not going anywhere deeper than 4 to 6 inches. The time of year will dictate what comes back out. So all we're doing by disking is creating soil disturbance. So we do this on road edges, field borders. We can take any diverse pattern we want. There's no reseeding needed. The seed bank or the amount of seeds in the soil already will be able to regrow simply from the disturbance. So normally what you get after this is a lot of croton or doveweed. I don't know what you call it in your area of the state, but croton, ragweeds, a lot of sunflower species. Okay, a lot of our wildflowers will come up. So it's relatively inexpensive. It's time and diesel basically. And if your tractor breaks down, whatever it costs to fix it, as well as the equipment. But all you've got to do is disc an area. Doesn't have to be disked more than once. And it works best in sandier soils because it's easier for the disc to penetrate and turn the soil. So as opposed to a root plow, this will maintain your diversity since it doesn't cut everything off below grade and remove all of the root system from a lot of the growing portion of the root system from all of these brush species. You will not lose diversity. You will actually maintain it. It can improve water infiltration because it creates ridges in the soil that hold water. And if you have a nice slow soaking rain, you have more surface area on the soil because of the shape of the soil to be able to penetrate. Okay. The only thing that we really have to watch for is if you are in an area where you have exotic grasses such as the King Ranch or Clayburgh blue stem that you're trying to get rid of already, any sort of disturbance will promote growth from those. So we just have to be careful. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. So some pictures of some disking. This is some red sandy loam, and you can see you've got green in the disc area there on the right-hand side, and the brown areas is actually their grass. Here is a spring picture from a helicopter. You can see all the yellow. A lot of bladder pods in South Texas are some of the first things to come up in spring, and they are yellow. And this is a field full of bladder pods and other forbs coming up because of the time of the disking. Okay. An example of a small disc behind a tractor. Okay, this is stuff that's not huge and heavy and very expensive. This would be an example of a heavier disc that can be substantially more expensive than the other disc right there. These are the types of forbs that we can get. So this is a Tiny Tim or Lazy Daisy. Some more daisies and some ragweed. And as far as continuing with this, with the axe, okay? Because the axe is anything above ground, the plow is anything below ground. So aeration, you can see in the back, there's an aerator being pulled by a dozer. So that aerator removes only the top of the plant. So it has very limited soil disturbance, maybe a couple of inches deep, similar to our disc, okay? It will help water infiltration as well, the same way the disc does. Now, we have to try to stay away from our mesquite trees because whenever we knock them down and we cut off the top part and we allow the roots to regrow, they're going to come back multi-stem. So if you have an area that's thick in mesquite, this will only make it worse. So it's also not good on rocky or gravelly soils. Obviously, if we have rocky or gravelly soils, it's very hard for this aerator, for the teeth on the aerator to dig into the soil and actually move anything or cut anything off the top. Okay. Again, similar to disking, you can do this along road edges, along old senderos, or along old seismic lanes, around areas that you want to maintain kind of a clear area. Okay, so this multi-stemmed regrowth is what I was talking about with the mesquites. Most of our South Texas brush will regrow, and it will regrow multi-stem. So we just have to be careful. This is not a one-time application. This is probably a once every 5 to 6 years application if done correctly. Okay. This is an example of an aerator. So you can see there all the teeth in a spiral around the drums. You do need a heavy tractor or a heavy dozer to be able to pull something like this, because those drums are actually filled with water. That way they weigh enough to be able to penetrate the soil. There's a closer look at the teeth. This is what it does to the ground. You can see all the little divots. All those divots will hold water, and they will slow water down that's sheeting across the floor, the ground. So this is what it looks like after aeration. This is what it looks like once it recovers. So the next technique is chemicals or herbicides. So these can actually be cheaper than a lot of mechanical treatments, depending upon your goals and the application and the size of the area being treated. Okay, you are able to target more specifically an individual plant or an individual species with herbicides than you are with any other mechanical technique. Now, we have to be careful which chemicals we use, because you can actually reduce the amount of forbs coming up, what we call forb shock, from anywhere from 3 to 6 years. Okay, so they're very useful in areas dominated by a monoculture. What a monoculture is simply an area covered with a single species of plant. So if you want to target mesquite or huisach or broomweed or any other specific species of weed, there's usually a chemical application specifically for that. Or also, if you want to broaden it, say you want to get rid of mesquite and huisach and some other things, well, you can have a mixture of chemicals to be able to treat those. Okay, you can eradicate exotic species. And when we're talking about exotics, most people think of animals, not plants, but there are lots of exotic plants, and those are usually our invasive plants, such as I talked about earlier, a clayberg or king ranch bluestem. Okay, especially if you're trying to reintroduce native species to your pastures and to your property, one of the best things to do is spray these exotic grasses ahead of time. That way, the native species do not have to compete as much for resources. Okay. It can also be very useful as an initial treatment before prescribed fire. So if we have a lot of woody brush that likely would not be killed by a fire, we can treat it with herbicide prior to several years, and then apply fire later on to be able to burn up the already dead brush quickly. So before we spray, of course, we need to know our goals. We need to know what we want from the ability to spray. What do we want to get rid of? How much of it do we want to get rid of? When do you think you will have time to spray? Is that within the window that specific herbicide is supposed to be treated at? Okay. So we also need to understand the potential effects of manipulating the area. So if we get rid of every single species of brush on the property, there may not be shade left for wildlife or for livestock. There may not be habitat left for livestock or for wildlife. So we really need to look back at our plan, our wildlife management plan. So most herbicides are not directly toxic to wildlife, meaning if it gets on them, it's not going to kill them. It's not going to really hurt them very much at all. If they drink it a little bit in the water, so long as you're using the recommended rates, you likely will not have any issues. Okay. The main issue that we have are indirect, and that meaning that, well, if we aerially spray from an aircraft the entire pasture, we may remove all of their habitat, like I was talking about earlier. That would be a detrimental effect to wildlife. We have to make sure to be careful with the forbs. because of that forb shock, the potential forb shock. But as we get better and better technology and better herbicides, we have gotten better and better at making sure not to really kill a lot of these forbs. Ground-based applications are a lot better if you're trying to treat small areas or individual species or individual plants within a given area. Like say you want to spray a fence line to remove all the vegetation from a fence line. You don't want to do that from the air. It's way too expensive, and it's really not the best way to do it. You can hook up a sprayer to the back of a pickup truck and drive down the fence line and let it spray as you drive. Okay. So, like I said earlier, some of these mixtures will create damage to perennial forbs or to some trees that you may want to keep. We have to choose the timing of our application carefully. So for instance, if we are spraying mesquite, which is probably the most commonly sprayed brush species all over Texas, we're not going to do it in the middle of winter. Okay, we're not going to foliar spray or spray the entire plant and the leaves during the winter, because it's not the growing season for that plant. It's dormant. You have to spray it in summer when it's green. So the best way to do that is make sure to read the label of the chemical that you plan to use and follow the directions accordingly. So avoid spraying in riparian corridors. The first thing I said earlier was riparian corridors. We need to really try to stay out of those riparian corridors, because those are the areas for wildlife that are some of the most important. They have water, they have shade, they have trees that are usually trees and brush species that are usually not manipulated. So we need to try to maintain that so we have some diversity on the properties. Okay. We need to also try to make sure to be sensitive to some of our habitats with endangered species. We don't want to really remove those plants and that habitat from an endangered species that's already endangered and may be close to extinction. We just need to be careful. Okay, so another technique, a mechanical technique, chiseling. Okay, this is basically just a 2 to 6 shank implement. What that means is that there are forks that stick down, and they get pushed through the soil, and you may also have called it a ripper. And what they do is they really help with compacted soils. Areas that have been compacted, either whether it's through vehicular traffic or over years and years of overgrazing. It does minimize the brush disturbance, because we're not really messing with the brush, we're messing directly with the soil. Okay, it's only, again, 3 to 5, maybe 10 inches deep at the most. And what happens afterwards is this is the way it looks. You can see there the soil, there's only lines of areas that have been broken up, and you can see exactly where that growth is in those areas. So grazing management. Grazing is a tool, okay? It's actually a tool that a lot of people that are wildlife-only managers don't utilize, especially in South Texas with all of our exotic grasses, as much as they probably should, okay? When talking about grazing management, we really need to rotate. So you can't just leave cattle out there and let them eat all of the best plants that they want, because they're eventually going to disappear, the plants, okay? We need to try to take half, leave half. And the only way to do that is to know what you had to begin with. So there are some ways and some techniques that we can use, such as enclosures. You can fence off a little area where the cattle cannot eat, and you can actually see what the pasture looked like before you brought the cattle in, and then right next to it, what it looks like with all the cattle. Okay, you need to be flexible. If you have drought conditions, you need to be able to move them. If you can't move them, you may need to get rid of them or sell some. At the same time, if you've got a really wet year, you may be able to add some, but you need to be flexible, okay? Fencing is your friend. As many places that are getting rid of interior fences, those fences are your friends, okay? You can really exclude animals from areas that you don't want. So here we have obviously some cattle grazing. Here is a picture I don't know if y'all can see it very well, but the right side of the picture, there is absolutely no grass. Now, the left side doesn't have a whole lot, but that's what it should look like before grazing. This was probably a very, very dry year, and they're native grasses, so they're not very thick to begin with. But that's what cattle can do. You can make or break habitat. This is one of those enclosures I was talking about. This is one side of an enclosure. You can see the grass that's supposed to be in the pasture throughout and what's actually left after grazing. Here's the other side of that same enclosure. Okay, you can see again, this is in the winter, and that's why everything is dry and brown. But on the right side where it's grazed, there isn't much. And on the inside, you can see all the leaves. There's quite a bit of grass. Now, in extreme situations where you have a substantial amount of not only livestock but wildlife as well, you get this. You actually have a browse line where you can kind of duck down and you can look all the way through a pasture almost. They've eaten all the browse off, all the available browse off of that tree within reach, and the cattle or any other grazing species have actually grazed the grass down to almost nothing. Okay. So here is a picture of some Texas sage or cenizo. This is actually a brush species that cattle like a lot. So whenever we go and look at habitat, when they're starting to hit a lot of the brush, that could be the beginnings of, well, there's too many cattle on the property at this given moment. So fences, again, are your best friend, a very easy way to exclude cattle from different areas or any other livestock, especially wet areas, our riparian corridors, okay? We need to exclude them when needed. So harvesting, the axe, the cow, the plow, the fire, and gun. This would be the gun. So that's a lot of deer for a lot of people, okay? In some cases, that really isn't a whole lot of deer. The land, just like livestock, can only hold so many wildlife species without doing damage to that property, okay, or to that land. That's called the carrying capacity. Now that number changes day to day, hour to hour, month to month. We usually talk about it like it's a static number, like it doesn't change from year to year, but it does. So we always have to make sure that we try to manage our wildlife populations through hunting to a point where they can actually sustain themselves and they're not detrimental to the habitat around them. Some examples of that are this. You can see there on the left-hand side and the right-hand side, this is a Brazil species of brush. So you can see that it's been eaten down substantially in the past. And down the left-hand side, you can see where it's beginning to regrow. Now that's all the area that is available to a white-tailed deer. So like we talked about in those pictures before, where there was a browse line, well, there was a browse line on that, and now it's starting to recover after deer being removed in large numbers from that property. This is what you will get on a wider piece of brush. This is actually a coma tree, and you can see that that angle like this, it almost looks like a little Christmas tree. That's because they're eating everything that's available and everything they can reach. And it's not just white-tailed deer that do this. It's all wildlife species and all grazing species. So this is an agarito brush, agarito species that's, you can see it looks like it's hedged. It's cut directly across on the top. So the brush out in a pasture can begin to look like something that somebody would have manicured there in their front lawn. This is Texas kidneywood. It's one of our most palatable plants to white-tailed deer. It likes to grow really, really long shoots, and I mean long, like a foot to 2 to 3 feet long, depending upon water availability. And you can see there, every branch isn't longer than 3 or 4 inches, and that's due to browsing. So our exotic wildlife species do the same thing. Most people will never see this, but that's actually a browse line from a giraffe. So that tree is actually about 15 feet tall. And that's a browse line from giraffes being in that pasture and not being moved. So this is, again, overgrazing, and a browse line. And actually, one of the exotics that that grazes the most and does a lot of damage in some areas is zebras. Okay, so we always have to manage for multiple goals. We're always managing for lots of different things. So an example would be I want deer, cattle, and quail. Well, we got to realize that you're not going to maximize everything, but you are potentially going to have good production of everything. Okay. So diverse and healthy habitats make for diverse and healthy wildlife populations. You need a diversity. So there's lots of available places where you can get help through Parks and Wildlife, through our AgriLife Extension Services, through our NRCS, through some other conservation organizations, or some individuals as far as private consultants. Okay. There's lots of programs with Parks and Wildlife, and I can see that I'm already over time, so I'm trying to go through this quickly. But we have lots of programs. You can contact me or your local biologist for more information. The extension has lots of different things that they do. The same with Natural Resource Conservation Service. Organizations, when I say conservation organizations, I'm talking about lots of different places like Cesar Claiborne Wildlife Research Institute, okay, National Wild Turkey Federation, Quails Unlimited, Ducks Unlimited, Audubon, Nature Conservancy. There's quite a few out there. These are some links for some more information on these different places. And with that, I'll take any questions if there's any time left.
Okay. I think we got a couple of questions in the chat box for you. We're looking at what chemicals or pesticides can be used to remove, and they have pata de gallo grass.
Clayburgh bluestem. So you can, just a second. You can use anything with glyphosate, so Roundup, that will kill it. The thing is that it needs to be a multiple application. So one application is only going to kill the plant that's there, that's already grown. You need to make sure that to do multiple applications once it comes back up, because there is a seed bank there. That Clayburgh bluestem really puts out a whole lot of seed, and that seed stays viable in the soil from anywhere from 3 to 5 years.
Okay. And we got another question. Let me see here. Can wildlife populations such as deer be managed through the introduction of predators into the habitat?
To some extent, yes. Usually when we think of predators for white-tailed deer, we're thinking of a coyote. Now, they only take so many. Bobcats as well will take quite a few deer, a lot more than we give them credit for. They actually take a lot of fawns and actually full-grown deer as well. However, our larger predators, they're pretty much gone. So we're talking about mountain lions, which we do still have some in South Texas and West Texas mainly. We're talking about bears. We don't have hardly any left. Wolves are gone. Jaguars are gone. Most all of our large predators that would have naturally regulated these larger mammals are gone. Okay, so they really don't have the ability left to regulate themselves, and unfortunately, that's where we have to come in as hunters to be able to help manage these populations, especially when we're feeding all sorts of protein feed, corn, different attractants for wildlife to help them throughout droughts.
Okay. We also have another question. Can you put the link slides back up? I guess they wanted to see some of the links.
Yes. Let me. There you go.
Okay, we'll leave that up. And as you can, we got one more question here. What do you recommend to limit the spread of tallow trees?
Tallow trees. I'd have to do some research on that. And actually, there's a good publication from AgriLife Extension Service that has a lot of different rates and a lot of different herbicides listed for different plants that we're trying to get rid of. I'm pretty sure tallowweed is probably on there. If you put your email address into the chat, I'm pretty sure we can get you a link to download that publication, or I can just email it.
Okay. And we got one last question here is, can glyphosate be used in a Bermuda grass field, which coastal, to eradicate crabgrass, and how to apply it as far as to calibrate the sprayer?
I would say no, unless you have a Bermuda grass variety that is resistant to glyphosate, because glyphosate will kill it.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess that will conclude if there's any more questions, just please add those questions to the chat box, and we'll have Eric get back to those questions later, and he can go ahead and answer those questions. We will move on to our next presenter. I know we're running a little behind. And is there anything else, Megan, that we need to cover?
No, you can go ahead and move on to the next presenter.
Okay, so next we will have Larissa Place. She is the field representative under the Trade and Business Development Division with the Texas Department of Agriculture. And she will go ahead and tell us a little bit about the programs that they have to offer. And she's located in the West Texas area. So Larissa, I'll let you take it over.
Good afternoon, almost afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay, awesome. All right, let me get this going. Okay, are we good?
Good.
Perfect. All righty. So as Ronnie mentioned, my name is Larissa Place. I'm a field representative for the Texas Department of Agriculture. I'm just going to go over a few informational facts first on agriculture in the state of Texas, just to give you an idea of what we contribute nationally and internationally even. So as you can see here, we lead the nation in cattle, cotton, hay, sheep, goats, and mohair production. For my area, most people don't think about sheep, goat, and mohair production as being something major, but in my territory here in the Western region, that is one of our biggest. But of course, cattle and cotton are two major commodities here. 12% of our population does reside in rural areas, which may not seem like a lot until you consider the size of Texas, and actually 12% of that size of a state is actually quite impressive. So you can see here, agriculture really is one of the driving forces of our working Texans, being 14% of folks are in agricultural related jobs. That can be something as simple as farming and ranching. Not that farming and ranching is simple, but that's what most people think about, but they don't think about the research, someone working maybe at TDA, inspectors, different things like that. I put in a couple of these just to give you, again, another idea of where we are. But in the nation, Texas has basically 127 million acres that we farm and ranch, which again is huge. We have states in our country that don't even have that many acres as a whole, and that's what we're farming and ranching. And for this particular group, I added this number. We have 37% of our producers in Texas are women. So that is growing, which me as a woman is really proud to see. It's something that we need to keep increase year over year, but 37% is actually a great number, especially from where we started. The average age of Texas farmers and ranchers is 58 years old. That's actually a number that we don't like. And I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes with some programs that TDA offers to try and help counter that number. As we all know, technology and things like that are taking over our younger generations. And the last thing they want to do is go out and work, especially in this Texas heat, for farming and ranching jobs. So we're trying to do our best to keep younger generations interested in farming and ranching in the state of Texas. And we do that with a couple different things. We have programs that we present starting at elementary schools all the way to grants and things like that to help them start their business. And this number here, this next bullet point, $100 billion annually. That is what the state of Texas produces for our food and fiber sectors, and that's our economic impact, and that is a huge number. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just nationally, it's internationally as well. So we are ranked number 6 overall in agricultural exports. So that, again, that's worldwide. So number 6 is, again, huge when you're talking about all the different countries and communities out there. This gives you just kind of a better visual breakdown of our commodities, and of course cattle there being $10.5 billion annually in the state of Texas. When we go to our schools and we have milking and different things like that we show the younger kids, and they smell cow manure and they kind of go, oh my gosh, it's so stinky. We always tell them that that does not stink. That is the smell of money. And here in Texas, we love that smell. So we just try and get different ideas across to the kiddos. And this is one of the biggest things that we show them about what we contribute as a state. And if you look down at the bottom, eggs and vegetables, you say only $439 million. That's a lot if you're looking at the numbers. So we really contribute quite a bit here. So me as a field representative, I work for the Trade and Business Development Division of TDA, and I'm going to go into a little bit detail about what they do, just to give you an idea of what's out there. As Ronnie mentioned earlier, I have the Western region. So if you see that grayish purple color, region number 1, that is me. I have 32 counties that I am responsible for, and I travel as much as I can. Of course, things have slowed down right now. Your rep down in the valley would actually be Nelda Barrera. She is out of the office right now and asked me to fill in for her. I am somewhat familiar with your territory. My parents did live in Brownsville, and I know that I should not complain about the heat up here because it is even hotter down there. But this gives you a great idea of the breakout of our trade and business development regional field reps, getting out there and helping Texas as best we can. So what we do a lot of economic development. We help try and attract businesses to communities to help increase their economic development and their sales, taxes, different things like that to small communities, especially rural communities. And as the next bullet point there states, there's different grants to rural communities, lots of things as far as infrastructure, broadband. We know that broadband in the state of Texas is one of the toughest issues. I live in a very small rural area. I don't live in town. We have about 160 acres, and I have satellite internet, which is not always the most dependable, but it's something that we struggle with, of course, out here in rural communities. So we work with different partners to help try and get broadband services to our rural communities. We have the Certified Retirement Community Program that helps attract older generation to the state of Texas. As we all know, Florida is the #1 retirement community in the United States, and Texas is number 2. We would love to overtake Florida. So we have a program within TDA that does a certified retirement community. And basically, if your community, we're not talking about individual retirement communities, say for 55 plus, a housing community. This is your city, could be a retirement community. So if somewhere in your community you have great hospitals, events for 55 and plus, different things like that, we just help draw people to the state of Texas with our certified retirement communities. And here's one that's probably more appropriate for you guys, is our certified farmers market program. There are a lot of farmers markets out there. We help make them a little bit more, not presentable, but just it gives them a little bit more credit being certified by TDA as a certified farmers market. There's certain regulations that need to be in place. So we know that we have great farmers markets in the state of Texas. Having a farmers market, you do not have to be certified by TDA. It's just a great program that we offer that gives you just a little bit more notoriety within the farmers market community. And then we have our Go Texan program. Hopefully most of you have heard of our Go Texan program. We basically just help promote Texas-based businesses and products, and I'll go into that program a little bit later. So here again, more things that we do as far as trade and market development. We have livestock pins for exporting. We assist with borders, things like that for our livestock and crops as far as our trade and development of those particular items. And then some of the more specific things that I'll get into are financial assistance to farmers and ranchers. We have loans, we have grants, we have loan guarantees, interest rate reductions, and young farmers. And again, I'll go into those more specifically, a couple of them here in a minute. But those are just some of the items that as a field rep, we get that information out there to folks that need it. We also assist in research and development of agricultural technologies. Of course, we work very closely with Texas A&M and Texas Tech with different programs that they have for agricultural research. And then, as we mentioned, there's different policies and things like that associated with agriculture in the state and within the nation and within exporting. And so our Commissioner Sid Miller, we have our deputy commissioners that are all basically working to help promote Texas agriculture nationally and internationally. So let me go into a little bit more specifics. So we do have our Young Farmer Grant. As I mentioned earlier, that average age of farmers and ranchers is 58 years old, which again, we hate seeing that number. We need to help bring that down a little bit. So the Young Farmer Grant was created just to help younger generations get into the agricultural business. You have to be between 18 and 45 years old. Luckily, I would still qualify for there. I'm getting a little bit too close for my liking, but 18 and 45 years. Grant awards, you can see there range from $5,000 to $20,000, and we do that twice a year, usually in the spring and fall. I will say that with the current situation with COVID-19, we are working with due dates on different things because obviously there's a few hiccups with different grants and programs that we're working with. So it might not specifically be spring and fall this year. One thing that we always like to mention, if they're wanting to use some of the money towards a capital purchase, new equipment of some sort, that cannot exceed $5,000. It is a matching grant, so the applicant must be able to have the same amount of funds that they're seeking. So if they're looking for $20,000 in grant funds, they need to be able to supply $20,000. So they would have a total of $40,000. And it is a reimbursement basis. So the applicant, if they are awarded the grant, they would need to purchase what it is that they're wanting, and then they would be reimbursed for the Young Farmer Grant portion. So receipts and all of that must be kept because as you can see there, that last item, it must be within the term of the grant award. So what you apply for, that is what you must seek reimbursement for. If you changed your mind and decided to do something else, you may not be reimbursed for that because that was not the official awardment. So that's a great program that we have. We have had a lot of interest in it. We get applicants all the time for this particular grant, and so it does really well. And it can be for someone that is expanding a current operation or starting, but it must be an agricultural related business. So here's some more grants and loans. So we have Texas Agricultural Finance Authority. We call it TAFA at TDA. So basically it's a loan guarantee program. As you can see there, the numbers, it's $250,000 or 90% of the loan, whichever is less, or $500,000 or 80%, whichever is less. So that's a loan guarantee program. We don't have a lot of folks applying for that particular program. We would like to see more, but it's a great loan guarantee program. And then we also have the Young Farmer Interest Rate Reduction Program. Very similar to the Young Farmer Grant, you must be between that 18 and 45 years old. but it is an interest rate reduction program. So you're going to get a better rate than what a standard bank would be able to provide to you. Our STEP program, which is our state trade export program. If you are looking at taking your product internationally, cattle, beef, vegetables even, we do have that STEP program that will assist you in getting your product international. There's a lot of different programs within TDA. There's SUSTA, which I'm not sure if any of you have heard from. That is not a TDA program, but we work very closely with SUSTA to help with the trade of agriculture and products from the state of Texas to other international countries. And the last one that I have listed here is our Capital for Texas Small Business Loan Program. Again, $5,000 to $350,000. Our average investment is about $100,000. That again is it's a great program, not utilized as much as we would like to see it. And anywhere in between here, if anyone is interested in more specific, because I just obviously highlighted some of the major things of these programs, let me know in the chat, and I can send you a one-pager that gives you all the details on these programs if you want something more specific. A very cool program that TDA has. Now, there's no money or anything like that involved with this particular program, but it's our Family Land Heritage Program. Basically, we recognize and honor families who have owned and operated an agricultural farm and ranch for 100 years or more. As long as you can prove that is within your same family, that is something that you'd be eligible for. We do have a ceremony in Austin where the TDA commissioner, currently right now Sid Miller, does present you with your award. And it's just a very cool program. Texas has a lot of heritage within our state, and we like to celebrate that. So if you or anybody you know has had a farm or ranch agricultural type operation for more than 100 years, they can apply. We usually have the deadline in May. This year we did, we just missed it. It just ended July 1st. They extended it to July 1st this year, but we do it every year. So you can apply, and you can come down to Austin and be awarded with a certificate of our Family Land Heritage Program. This program here, our Community Development Block Grant, we call CDBG. This is less towards individual farmers and ranchers and directed more towards communities. So the other part of my job is working with our rural communities to help better their situations. Basically what CDBG does is economic development to our non-entitlement cities. So under 50,000 or a county that is under 200,000, which I know in the far west and in our south, that's pretty easy to qualify for there. Our CDBG grants are the most popular grant that we have at TDA. We have a lot of communities that utilize this to better their communities with water lines, road repairs, different things like that. Some folks ask how it's agricultural related, but infrastructure, different things like that to farming communities is huge. So CDBG can go towards that kind of program as well. This is brand new as of last year. It's under the CDBG program, but it's called our FAST Fund. It's fire, ambulance, and services trucks. So again, in our small rural communities, there's not a lot of funding to better the equipment that our emergency responders are using. This does not go towards any police. I always have to stress that. It is for fire trucks, ambulances, Jaws of Life, rescue boats, equipment like that for life-saving measures for, again, fire EMT services. This does have the same rules as far as the non-entitlement communities. So that 50,000 city or 200,000 county. I always say that if a community, say a county, has multiple volunteer fire departments, the county can apply and then distribute the money to one or multiple volunteer fire departments if they so choose to do that. And then we have our Texas Capital Fund. This is going to support rural business development. Again, trying to get more economic development coming to our smaller communities. And that can be in the shape of downtown revitalization programs, Main Street, infrastructure, real estate. When I talk about real estate, these will not assist in funding a new development, but what it will assist in is maybe getting infrastructure to a lot so a developer doesn't have to pay for that expense, and makes it a little bit more affordable for a developer to come in for new housing in your area. I think I go into more detail here with our downtown revitalization and Main Street programs. Again, it can be anywhere between $50,000 to $150,000. I always say this isn't necessarily going to be to help with a facade improvement program within your community, but it does assist with handicap barriers, deteriorated conditions, just to clean up that downtown area, maybe new lighting, things like that. And what that does is that increases more business interest in coming to your downtown area. And so that's how it helps with economic development. The deadline for those are generally in October. As I mentioned earlier, we do have our Go Texan program. I am wearing my Go Texan shirt today. So I hope most of you know what the Go Texan program is. We help promote Texas-based businesses. If you make, manufacture, grow, produce anything in the state of Texas, you potentially could be a Go Texan program. We basically say if you're adding value to our state, we'd love to have you. This is going to go into a little bit more detail. The program was launched in 1999. So last year we celebrated our 20-year anniversary with the Go Texan program. And we actually had quite a few members who have been with us since the beginning. And we gave them some special awards for being 20-year members. Basically it's a marketing program, and it helps you, millions of Texans see that logo on your product and know it's Texas, a Texas-based product, and they're more likely to buy it. And this next slide will show you some of that information. So as you can see there, 97% perceive the quality of Texas goods to be superior to non-Texas products. 81% agree that buying Go Texan products is a reflection of Texas pride. 81% make an effort to purchase Texas products. And 72% say they would be influenced to purchase Go Texan products promoted at an in-store event. This is where I tell everybody that I am not originally from Texas. Some of my friends down here still say I sound a little Yankee-ish to them, but I say I got here as fast as I could. So one thing that I have realized in the state of Texas is the pride here is overwhelming. I have never experienced it in any of the 7 states that I have lived in. We have done taste tests at local HEBs, and let's just say salsa. If we have salsa A and B, and they do a taste test and say, I prefer the taste of A over B, we then take the cover off and we show them that A was made in New Mexico and B was made in Texas and is a Go Texan product, they will buy B. It doesn't matter if they prefer the taste of A, they are still going to buy B. And that is that Texas pride that I have never experienced anywhere else. And we use that to our advantage with the Go Texan program. So we have folks that literally go to the store and only buy Texas-based products when possible, and they look for that logo. So if you have a product, that may be something that you want to look more into. These are some of the businesses that can be Go Texan members. Obviously, food and beverage is huge within the Go Texan program, but I tell people it's not just that. We have toy makers, we have leather makers, different things like that. Restaurants, if you're a family owned and operated restaurant, we'd love to have you be a Go Texan member. Farms and ranches, of course, that's a huge one. If you're cattle, goat, if you're you have a watermelon farm, your farm or ranch itself can be a Go Texan member. And again, we help promote you in different ways. Farmers markets, as I mentioned before, nurseries, retailers, manufacturers, and some people question what as far as manufacturing. Just to give you an idea, we have someone who makes a portable air conditioner out of coolers. great for livestock shows or baseball games, but they're manufacturing a product here in the state of Texas. It may seem silly because it's not really agricultural related, but it's a Texas-based business and we want to help promote them. Trade producer associations, communities, and chambers. So we have chambers and cities that are Go Texan members, and we help promote their cities being a Go Texan member. So again, it's not just products. And then of course, events. So say a particular livestock show or a trade flea market even could be a Go Texan member. Here's some of the benefits of that Go Texan membership. That logo that I showed you on my shirt and earlier in the program, you can use that mark on all of your products, your website, your emails, your business cards. And again, that just helps people realize that you're a Texas product. And then we list you on our website. If you go to gotexan.org, we do list all of our Go Texan members on there. You can search by area, you can search by product. So if someone is looking for a leather belt, they can search in our gotexan.org website and find all of our Go Texan members that maybe do leather work. We of course have social media, Instagram, Facebook, all of those good ones. And we promote our Go Texan members on a daily basis. Events that they're holding, if we don't have any current events going on, we just promote their product and their company. We do have monthly e-zines, discounted rates for advertising and trade shows, and of course retail opportunities. HEB is a huge supporter of Go Texan, and we do a lot of retail opportunities with them. This picture here gives you a great idea of one of those events. This is the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. So TDA purchases that booth that you see there, and then those kiosks are what we will rent out to our Go Texan members. This is a huge cost-saving measure for someone trying to promote their business and product. Instead of having to have your own booth, say at a livestock show for 30 days, you have to be there every single day. The costs can be huge. We provide a space for them to come. They choose the dates that they want to be there. They don't have to be there the entire time. They don't have to have a huge inventory with them if they're coming just for a day. So those kind of events are a huge advantage to our Go Texan members. And then this picture down here is actually at State Fair of Texas. TDA has an entire pavilion, which is a few football fields long, and it's just TDA. And inside our pavilion, we have our Go Texan general store. We only sell Go Texan products. So we have people from all over the country at State Fair that come in and buy our products, our Go Texan products at the State Fair. Unfortunately, we just got word yesterday that our State Fair has been canceled. We're all a little brokenhearted about that, but we are actually, instead of having obviously our pavilion at State Fair, we're now offering our Go Texan members an online store, so they're not out on all of the advantages of having State Fair available to them. So that's a very quick, I talk fast again, that might be the Yankee in me, but I tried to get through there a little bit so we can save some time. Here is my contact information as well as Nelda's, since she would be your regional rep. But feel free to contact either one of us. We all work together as a team, obviously, and help each other out when we're not available. And I'd love to hopefully answer as many questions as I can if there are any.
Okay, great. The great information. You got a lot of information there, and very useful to help anybody that needs some guidance as far as, you know, helping them with their business, whichever direction they want to start into. One question we have is, can a parent and adult child apply for the young farmers as a pair?
If the parent is still within that age bracket, which 18 to 45, my math may not be, as long as both applicants are within that age bracket, then yes, they can. If they are both not, then no.
Okay, good deal. Well, thank you very much, Larissa. And we thank you very much for all our presenters. I'll go ahead and let Megan kind of give the final.
Thank you, Larissa. That was such a great presentation. Even I learned, I took some notes, so I'll be contacting you.
Awesome.
So some great information that was shared today. I know we went over time a little bit, so I'll go ahead and wrap things up. First of all, we want to thank our presenters for being here with us today and taking time out of your day to encourage women in agriculture. Again, we want to foster and emphasize the strength of this network. And if you have time, we hope that you can join us for our next session and our last Women in Agriculture program on July 22nd at 10 a.m. Via Zoom. So also, if there's any last minute questions, we'll go ahead and take those in the chat box. We won't necessarily ask them to the presenter, but we'll direct them to the presenter and the presenter will follow up with you. So please, if you have any questions, add your email address in the chat box and we can go ahead and direct those questions to the presenter you are requesting for. Again, Aisha did cover that we are recording this session. So we will have, as soon as we can compile the session, we'll start dispersing the presentation on those YouTube channels and we'll be able to send out links. Any final comments, Aisha or Ronnie?
I have the poll. to
Oh,
respond.
yes. Let's do one more poll before we go.
we'll
Okay,
give
so
it
we
a
have
minute.
2 here. How did you find out about this Women in Agriculture program? And then the second one, would you say you're a, and then just follow? Whoa, that was fast. We're getting tons. We'll wait a little bit longer.
That's good. Oh, there's the last one. 10 more seconds.
Whenever you're ready. Alrighty, so we have some great information. Again, we would just like to thank you for being here with us today, and we hope you can join our next Women in Agriculture session, July 22nd at 10 a.m. via Zoom. Thank you.